What if the person who broke your heart wasn't the end of your story, but the beginning of something far greater? At an airport filled with tears and goodbyes, Eleanor and Edward, two strangers abandoned by the ones they loved most, cross paths in the most unexpected way. What starts as a whisper to pretend soon turns into a love so real it changes their lives forever. This is a story of heartbreak, fate, and the power of second chances. The airport buzzed with noise, voices echoing, announcements filling the air, and footsteps scattering across polished floors. Eleanor stood still in the middle of it all, her suitcase beside her like an unwanted burden. Her eyes were swollen from crying, yet she tried to hold herself together, not wanting the strangers around her to see her pain. Her soft brown hair was tied back in a loose bun, though a few strands escaped, falling against her pale cheeks. She pressed her lips tightly as though sealing her emotions inside, but her trembling hands betrayed her. Every time she glanced at her reflection in the glass wall, she saw not just a young woman but a broken bride. She had left for a wedding full of dreams and had returned with nothing. No love, no dignity, only heartbreak. Her husband's betrayal was sharp, like a knife she hadn't seen coming. One moment he had whispered promises, the next he had thrown her aside, leaving her unwanted. The weight of humiliation pressed heavy on her chest. Across the terminal, Edward walked with slow, deliberate steps. His presence drew eyes. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and perfectly put together in a charcoal gray suit. But behind his striking appearance lay exhaustion, a kind of sadness money couldn't erase. He had just endured the same wound, though in a different form. His wife had slipped off her wedding ring as if it meant nothing and handed it back to him with cruel words, "I can't love you." The sound of those words still rang in his ears like an echo he couldn't silence. He had built companies, bought mansions, and conquered markets. But here, at this airport, he was nothing but a man left behind. The world might call him powerful, but his heart whispered otherwise. He was alone. As he walked past the waiting lounge, his usually steady steps faltered. He saw couples holding hands, families laughing, friends greeting one another. Each sight was another reminder of what he didn't have. Eleanor adjusted her suitcase handle and sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. Her chest heaved as she fought to keep her sobs quiet. But tears, like secrets, often find their way out. A single drop rolled down her cheek, catching the bright airport lights. She thought no one noticed, but Edward did. Something about her caught his attention instantly. Maybe it was the way her body shook as though carrying invisible weight. Or maybe it was because, deep inside, broken hearts recognize each other. He paused, unsure why he couldn't look away. In the middle of a sea of strangers, this woman felt familiar in her pain. Her loneliness mirrored his own. Eleanor lifted her head and tried to breathe deeply. She wiped her eyes, trying to appear normal, but her gaze drifted across the hall. And that's when her eyes met Edward's. For a moment, the noise of the airport faded. The rushing people, the loud announcements, the clattering bags, all blurred into silence. Only their eyes spoke, hers, shimmering with grief but also with unbroken strength. His, steady, deep, carrying secrets too heavy for words. Neither of them knew each other's names. Neither of them knew each other's past. But in that instant, two broken souls recognized the pain they both carried. Edward's chest tightened. Something inside him whispered that this meeting wasn't just chance. And Eleanor, though fragile and weary, felt the same unexplainable pull. They were strangers, yes, but the kind of strangers fate often uses to write new beginnings. At that crowded airport, filled with goodbyes and reunions, two abandoned hearts unknowingly stepped into each other's stories. It wasn't just an encounter. It was the beginning of something neither of them had dared to hope for. Eleanor stood near the boarding lounge, her suitcase parked beside her like a silent witness to her pain. She was trying to stay invisible, trying not to draw attention, when suddenly her heart froze. Walking toward her, hand in hand with another woman, was her ex-husband. Her stomach twisted, her breath caught in her throat. The betrayal still felt fresh, like a wound that refused to close. Seeing him laugh with someone else so soon, as if she had never mattered, was a cruelty she wasn't prepared for. Her pulse raced, her knees weakened, and she felt trapped. Her mind screamed, "Don't let him see you broken. Don't let him think you're still crushed." But she had no one beside her, no shield, no friend to lean on. Panic flared in her chest like a fire she couldn't control. She scanned the terminal desperately, searching for an escape. And then her eyes landed on Edward. He stood just a few feet away, tall and steady, flipping through his phone. His presence radiated calm, even though he too carried scars. Something inside her pushed her forward before she could think. Her feet moved on their own, her heart pounding in her ears. Within seconds, she was standing right in front of him. Edward looked up, surprised to see a young woman rushing toward him with desperate eyes. Before he could ask what was wrong, Eleanor leaned closer, her voice trembling, barely a whisper. "Pretend to hug me, please, just for a moment." The words hit him like lightning. He froze, trying to process what this stranger had just asked. Of all the things he expected at the airport, this wasn't it. But her eyes, oh, her eyes, were filled with such fear, such urgency, that he couldn't refuse. Without hesitation, he opened his arms. Eleanor pressed against him, her small frame trembling. She buried her face against his chest as though hiding from the world. Edward's arms wrapped around her instinctively, strong yet gentle. To anyone watching, they looked like lovers reunited after a long time apart. But to the two of them, it was something deeper, a fragile, desperate act of survival. Her ex-husband walked past, glancing at them. For a moment he frowned, his pride stung. But then he turned away, tightening his hold on the woman beside him, as if trying to prove he had moved on. Eleanor held her breath until he disappeared into the crowd. Relief washed over her, but her body refused to let go of Edward just yet. Edward felt her trembling ease slowly in his embrace. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. But holding her in that moment felt strangely right, as if his arms were meant to shield her. He lowered his voice, calm and steady, and asked softly, "Are you okay?" Eleanor pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "I'm sorry," she whispered quickly, her voice breaking. "I shouldn't have done that. I just—" But Edward shook his head lightly. "Don't apologize. Sometimes we need strangers to stand in for the ones who failed us." The truth in his words struck her heart. Her lips trembled, and for a moment she thought she might cry again. But instead, she gave him a weak, grateful smile. She had asked for a pretend hug, but what she found was something real, comfort. And Edward, though he didn't show it, felt the same. That simple, whispered request had cracked open the walls he had built around his heart. In that crowded airport, full of strangers, a single whisper connected two lives that had been shattered in different ways. Neither of them knew it yet. But that hug, the one meant to be fake, was the beginning of something far too real to ignore. Eleanor's heart was still racing as she slowly stepped back from Edward's embrace. The warmth of his arms lingered on her skin, though her cheeks burned with embarrassment. She looked down, clutching the handle of her suitcase, unsure what to say. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice small, like a child afraid of being scolded. Edward tilted his head, studying her. He saw the redness in her eyes, the exhaustion etched on her face. There was a fragility about her, but also strength, the kind of strength born from surviving heartbreak. "Don't thank me," he said quietly, his deep voice steady. "It looked like you needed it." She nodded, biting her lip, trying to hold back more tears. The airport buzzed around them, but for a moment, it felt like they were standing in their own world. Edward gestured toward the row of empty seats near the glass wall. "Sit with me?" he asked, not as a demand, but as an invitation. Eleanor hesitated, but something about him felt safe, safer than anyone had felt in months. She followed him, and they both sat down. Silence stretched between them at first. Eleanor fiddled with the zipper of her bag while Edward kept his hands clasped on his lap. Neither of them knew where to begin. Finally, Eleanor exhaled shakily. "I don't usually do things like that," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean to drag you into my mess." Edward gave a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You think your mess is unusual? Trust me, heartbreak isn't as rare as we like to think." Her gaze lifted to meet his, curious, uncertain. "What do you mean?" she asked softly. He leaned back, his eyes fixed on the runway outside. "Today was supposed to be the happiest day of my life," he confessed. I was married this morning, and by afternoon she handed me back the ring and told me she couldn't love me." Eleanor gasped softly, her hand covering her lips. For a moment she forgot her own pain and saw only his. The way he said it, not bitter, not angry, just hollow, made her chest ache. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice filled with sincerity. Edward turned his head, meeting her gaze again. The sadness in his eyes reflected her own. "What about you?" he asked gently. She swallowed hard. Her throat tightened, but she forced the words out. "My marriage lasted 3 months. He said he loved me, but I was just a convenience. He found someone else, and when I asked why, he said, because she was better." Her voice cracked on the last word. She looked away quickly, ashamed of the tears threatening to fall again. But Edward didn't look at her with pity. He looked at her with recognition, with understanding. "I know how that feels," he said quietly. "Being replaced, being made to feel like you're not enough, it breaks something inside you." His words hit her like a mirror, reflecting everything she had been too afraid to say out loud. For the first time she felt seen, not judged, not pitied, but understood. They sat in silence again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was comforting, like two wounded souls resting side by side. The terminal lights glowed softly around them, the hum of conversations becoming background music to their shared moment. Eleanor finally whispered, almost to herself, "Isn't it strange? We were both left behind. And yet, here we are, sitting together like this." Edward's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Sometimes the people who leave us make space for the people we're meant to meet." Her heart skipped at his words. She didn't know why, but sitting next to this stranger, she felt less broken than she had in weeks, and Edward, though he didn't admit it aloud, felt the same. For the first time since his wife's betrayal, hope flickered quietly inside him. In the middle of that crowded airport, they discovered something rare. Two broken hearts could beat stronger when they recognized each other. The announcement board flickered again, and Eleanor groaned softly. Her flight had been delayed. She rubbed her forehead, exhausted from the long day, from the emotional weight pressing down on her shoulders. She thought of sitting alone, drowning in her misery. But then she glanced at Edward, and her chest tightened. Something about his quiet presence made her feel less invisible. Edward checked his watch. His own flight had also been rescheduled, hours later than planned. He sighed, but strangely he didn't mind. It gave him more time here, more time beside the stranger who already didn't feel like a stranger. As the night deepened, the crowd thinned. The once busy terminal grew quieter, filled only with the echo of rolling luggage and the distant murmur of voices. Eleanor's stomach rumbled, betraying her. She blushed, embarrassed, but Edward only chuckled softly. "There's a cafe still open," he said gently. "Come, let's get something to eat." Eleanor hesitated. She didn't want to be a burden, didn't want to seem needy. But the sincerity in his tone disarmed her. "All right," she whispered, her voice barely above the hum of the terminal. They walked side by side to the cafe, their steps slow, unhurried. Edward ordered warm food for them both, nothing fancy, just simple comfort meals. They sat across from each other at a small table, the soft yellow light casting a glow over their tired faces. For the first time in weeks, Eleanor tasted food without it feeling like ash. She laughed, an actual laugh, when Edward made a light remark about the coffee being strong enough to wake the dead. Her laughter startled her. It had been so long since joy had slipped past her lips. Edward stared at her, mesmerized. The sound of her laughter was like music he hadn't realized he needed. They talked as they ate, their words flowing easily now. Eleanor spoke about her childhood dreams, about how she once believed love was the only treasure worth chasing. Edward listened intently, his gaze never wavering. In return, he opened up about his world, a world of wealth and power that often felt like a golden cage. He confessed that behind the image of a billionaire was just a man who wanted someone to love him for who he was, not for what he owned. The hours passed unnoticed. The cafe closed, but they stayed in the lounge, leaning closer as they talked. The terminal lights dimmed slightly, the night wrapping them in its quiet embrace. At some point, Eleanor leaned her head against his shoulder. The gesture was small, but it sent a rush of warmth through Edward's chest. His hand twitched, tempted to hold hers, but he stayed still, savoring the fragile intimacy. "I should feel broken tonight," Eleanor whispered, her eyes half closed. "But sitting here with you, I don't feel abandoned anymore." Edward's throat tightened. He turned his head slightly, gazing down at her. "I was drowning before you walked into my life," he admitted softly. "But you pulled me out without even trying." Her breath caught at his words. No one had ever spoken to her with such raw honesty. She closed her eyes, letting the moment sink in. For the first time since her heart had shattered, she felt safe. And Edward, wealthy, powerful, yet lonelier than he had ever admitted, felt alive. It wasn't the champagne toasts or the glittering parties that gave him life. It was this, sitting in a quiet airport with a woman who asked him for nothing but warmth. The night wrapped around them like a blanket, and neither wanted to let it go. It was supposed to be just a delay, just an inconvenience. But instead it became something rare, a night of unexpected warmth that neither of them would ever forget. The morning sun spilled gently through the airport glass, painting the floor in golden streaks. Eleanor stretched softly, her head still resting against Edward's shoulder. She blinked at the clock, realizing how quickly the night had vanished. What had started as two strangers hiding their pain had turned into something she couldn't name. The announcement board flickered to life again. Her flight number appeared. A sharp ache bloomed in her chest. This was it. The moment she would have to leave him. Her heart whispered, "I don't want to." Edward noticed the change in her expression. He followed her gaze to the board, and his stomach sank. Her flight was boarding. He tried to stay calm, but deep inside, panic rose. He wasn't ready to let her go. Eleanor stood slowly, clutching the handle of her suitcase. Her fingers trembled as she turned to him. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice low but filled with emotion. "You were a stranger who saved me last night. I'll never forget it." Edward rose to his feet too, towering above her, his jaw tight. "You make it sound like this is the end," he said softly, his tone almost pleading. Her lips quivered. "Isn't it? You have your life and I have mine." The silence between them was deafening. Travelers passed by, rushing to their gates, but the two of them stood frozen in their own world. Edward's chest tightened. For the first time in years, he was afraid. Not of failure, not of losing money, but of losing her. She started to walk toward the gate, every step heavy, as if dragging her own heart along the ground. Edward's feet moved before his mind could catch up. He reached out, gently catching her wrist. She stopped, turning to him with wide eyes. His voice was low, husky with emotion. "I don't believe in coincidences anymore, Eleanor. You came to me when I was at my lowest. That's not chance. It's fate." Her throat tightened at the sound of her name. The way he said it was different, like a vow, like she mattered. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the sight of him. I don't want to get hurt again," she whispered shakily. Edward stepped closer, his gaze burning into hers. "And I don't want to spend another day pretending I don't need you." Her suitcase wobbled as her grip weakened. Her body screamed to move forward, to board the plane, to escape the risk. But her heart was begging her to stay. The gate attendant called for final boarding. The sound pierced the air like a cruel reminder of reality. Eleanor looked at the plane, then back at Edward. His eyes held a storm, a mixture of desperation and hope. For one breathless moment, everything hung in silence. If she walked away now, it would all become nothing more than a memory. But if she stayed, if she listened to her heart, this could become the beginning of something far greater. Edward's hand slipped down to gently hold hers. "Don't let this be goodbye," he whispered. Her heart thundered, her tears finally spilled, and though her lips trembled, she managed to whisper back, "I don't want it to be." Edward held Eleanor's hand as if letting go would mean losing the most precious gift life had ever offered him. The terminal that once felt like a place of heartbreak now felt like the doorway to something extraordinary. Two strangers, once broken, had been stitched together by fate in the most unexpected place. A crowded airport where their tears had first crossed paths. Eleanor looked up at Edward, her voice soft but trembling with emotion. "I don't know why I asked you to pretend, maybe because I didn't want to feel invisible that day. But now, I don't want to pretend anymore." Her words pierced straight into Edward's heart. He gently lifted her hand to his lips and whispered, "Neither do I." From the moment you whispered those words, Eleanor, I knew you had awakened something inside me that I thought was dead forever. I don't want pretense. I want forever. With you. Tears streamed down Eleanor's cheeks, but for the first time in months, they weren't born of sadness. They were tears of relief, of joy, of hope. She had walked into the airport carrying heartbreak, yet now, in Edward's presence, she carried a promise of healing and love. The two of them sat together, speaking for hours. They shared stories of betrayal, of loneliness, of dreams that had once seemed unreachable. With each word, they realized how deeply their scars matched, how their wounds didn't make them weaker. They made them understand each other's souls better than anyone else ever could. By the time the sun dipped low beyond the airport windows, Edward finally said, "Eleanor, life doesn't give us second chances often, but maybe this, maybe we, are that second chance. I don't want to waste it." Her smile glowed through her tears as she whispered, "Then let's not waste it. Let's start again, not as broken people, but as two hearts choosing to heal together." And in that moment, Edward wrapped her into his arms, not pretending this time, but holding her with the fullness of a man who had finally found the love he never knew he was searching for. The lesson was clear. Society often teaches that wealth, status, or appearances are what matter most. But here were Edward and Eleanor, two abandoned souls, finding not riches, not power, but comfort in vulnerability, loyalty, and love. Their story was proof that love doesn't bloom in perfection. It blossoms in the ruins, where two people choose to rebuild together.